Welcome to today's session looking at digital inclusion. We're very lucky to have some expertise from Dorset Council joining us this morning. So we've got Susan Ward-Rice and we've got Lyndsey Trinder, and they're going to be talking through what digital inclusion is, who's affected by it, and some of the strategies that are being used to overcome digital inclusion with support from the council. I'm going to do a little sum up at the end, talking about how as a sector we can make ourselves more digitally inclusive. And then we're very lucky again to be joined by Ellie Maguire from Dorset Community Foundation, who's going to talk through their new round of funding. So I'm going to hand over now to Susan and to Lyndsey, and I'm going to stop sharing the agenda so we go back to full screen where we can see everybody. There we all are. Okay. So Susan, I'll hand over to you. And you're muted at the moment, Susan.
Am I unmuted now? Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Ward-Rice, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Dorset Council, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lyndsey Trinder, who's the Roots to Inclusion Project Officer. Do you want to say a little hello, Lyndsey?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited and pleased to see as many people here as there obviously are who want to find out about digital inclusion and what they can do about it. So yes, morning all, and thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. We're going to have a bit of a conversation, a bit of a presentation about digital inclusion and digital exclusion, but we thought we'd start with a poll question. So is it possible to put the first poll up, Rachel? So the question is, how many people in Dorset are digitally excluded? And it's a multiple choice question. So we've got 162,000, 150, 137,000, 68,000 and 25,000. Sorry, that's 150,000. So if you want to take a guess, or maybe you know, and then just submit your answers. Unfortunately, there's no prizes. How are we doing, Rachel?
Yeah, it looks like nearly everybody has voted. There might be some people on their phones that are unable to use the function at the same time. So I'm happy to show the results from that if you want.
There are 4 of us that are co-hosts, so we obviously won't be voting. So is probably.
Yeah, I won't vote as well because I know the answer.
Okay, I'll close that then.
Lyndsey won't. Thank you. Could we bring up the, so we've got sort of the winner at 41% at 150,000 with 150,000. And we're going to come back to the answer shortly. Is it possible to bring up the results again in a few minutes, Rachel? Is that okay?
Don't
worry if not, that's okay.
I think that's it. Once it's there, yeah.
Yeah, that's all right.
I'll do a screenshot, Rachel.
I've done a screenshot, yes.
Oh,
so yeah.
Fabulous. It's all about digital inclusion.
Yeah, I've just taken a screenshot. See, that's the limit of my Zoom skills. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. So as I say, we'll come back to that answer shortly. But sort of the way we live nowadays sort of increasingly relies on us being able to access sort of the internet and use computers, tablets, smartphones to do just that. Sort of why we're here today, really, how we're accessing this webinar. We're all expected to do online transactions such as paying bills, banking, booking hospital appointments, sorting out holidays, moving our electricity and gas suppliers, to applying to jobs. And the recent pandemic has sort of shown how much the internet has been useful in terms of keeping in touch with loved ones or being able to work from home, such as sort of ourselves very much at Dorset Council, and I'm sure some of you out there as well today. It's given us the freedom to do things when we want. So when we want to access the internet and do that business, we can do it late at night, early in the morning, or over the weekend, when often those services have been traditionally closed. However, we are conscious that some people are not benefiting from the internet and the opportunities that it brings, and we would call these people digitally excluded. So the opposite of digital exclusion is of course digital inclusion, and this covers having digital skills to be able to use devices, having connectivity, so being able to access the internet, and having the confidence and motivation to go online. And as we go through this presentation this morning, Lyndsey will be covering these in more detail. But first, a little bit about our journey at Dorset Council. We have a Roots to Inclusion team, which Lyndsey is part of, and this was set up about 6 years ago by one of Lyndsey's colleagues, Penny Siddle, who some of you may be aware of. The team then was called Superfast Dorset, and their aim was to get superfast broadband to everyone in Dorset. But over the last 6 years, this has now expanded to look at how we can make sure people in Dorset are getting the best out of all things digital. But as that work has developed over the last few years, Penny and her team have realised that as more services become digitalised, there was a risk that people who hadn't embraced being digital were getting left behind. And when Penny started to look at those numbers of people who were offline, the results were quite shocking and quite surprising as well, really. And so her, Lyndsey, and the team of volunteers have been working to address this in Dorset by tackling digital exclusion. Lyndsey's going to talk through sort of the work of the team, but before we do that, if we go back to that poll question, so the question was how many people in Dorset are digitally excluded, and the possible answers were 162,000, oh thank you, 137,000, 25,000, 68,000 and 150,000. Sorry. But unfortunately, it was a bit of a trick question, as the answer was all of the above. If we go through the numbers, that might help to explain. So the research has been carried out by citizens online who've been working with the Roots to Inclusion team on digital exclusion. So the figure of 162,000, this is an age-adjusted estimate of adults who lack at least one basic skill. And by age adjusted, we're just very conscious that our age bandwidths are very different in Dorset to sort of the national averages, as we have more older people in Dorset. 137,000 citizens online suggest that 21% of adults lack at least one basic digital skill. 25,000 is the number of people who live in a postcode where they're unable to access superfast broadband, and 68,000 again is an age-adjusted estimate of adults with zero basic digital skills. We're conscious in sort of that some people will fall into one or more of those categories. So in Dorset and in the Roots to Inclusion team, we estimate that there's probably 150,000 people who are digitally excluded, which is sort of similar to sort of what the majority of you clicked on the poll. But as I've said, we know digital exclusion isn't just about skills, it's also about that connectivity, being able to access equipment, and the motivation and confidence to get online. We're going to do another poll question, so could you bring up the second poll, please, Rachel? Thank you. So our second question is, what percentage of UK households have no smartphone? And the possible answers are 95%, 42%, 35%, 25% and 10%. So if you'd like to submit your answer. Again, there's no prizes. How are we doing? Thank you. So 36% of you thought it was 35%, and 30% thought it was 42%, and then another 30% thought it was 25%. And the actual answer is sort of 35%. So well done to the 36% of you. I sort of, when we were sort of looking at sort of what questions to ask, I was sort of really quite surprised about sort of this answer, that sort of that's over a sort of a third of households. It's just really interesting, sort of when the amount of people that you see with smartphones as well. So in Dorset, we estimate there's probably about 84,000 people who've never used the internet or have not used it in over the last 3 months. And we work with Experian, who have some similar data and suggest a figure of around 98,000 people are disengaged or are low internet users. So who's likely to be digitally excluded? Research from organisations such as the Good Things Foundation suggests that older people, people in low income groups, people without a job, people in social housing, people with disability, and that includes sort of 35% are less likely to have essential digital skills for life. People with fewer educational qualifications, so those people who may have been excluded from school or left before they were 16, homeless people, people living in rural areas, young people in care, and people whose first language is not English. So as you can see, that's quite a broad range of people. And they're all likely to be digitally excluded. But that's sort of the stats and the research. And we probably all know somebody in one of these groups who is probably digitally excluded. And certainly the current pandemic and the recent lockdown has put an even more of a spotlight on these groups of people. So Lyndsey's going to tell us a bit about the work that she and the team are doing. But before that, she and I are going to touch on some human stories. So one example would be a gentleman from East Dorset who called Lyndsey on the hotline, and sort of, Lyndsey, if I hand over to you.
Yes, I spoke to a gentleman. I'm going to tell you all about the hotline we've been running, but in particular, I spoke to a gentleman, and this was right in the middle of the lockdown, who was in his 80s, had never used a computer before, and he basically said to us, my wife is in a care home 8 miles away. I normally drive to see her on a daily basis, and he'd got this great arrangement with the care home that they'd feed him at lunchtime. He'd have a meal with his wife, and so it was social for him as well, and he'd see her and know she was okay. Sadly, once lockdown was brought in, he obviously wasn't able to do that. So for him, he wasn't seeing his wife, but he also wasn't getting out and socializing himself. The worst part was that his wife had dementia, and she was non-verbal, so he couldn't even phone her. So the reason he contacted us was to say, I'm going to buy a tablet, but I don't know what to do once I've bought it. What do I buy? What do I do with it? How do I know this thing called video calling, but how do I use it? How do I set it up? And so we were able to talk him through that process. It's actually really hard to set someone up remotely. The reason I know full well he's in East Dorset is so am I, and I ended up sat in his front garden setting up his tablet for him in lockdown, in drizzle of course, but never mind, and enabling him to do that, because prior to that he was obviously getting more and more isolated by the situation that he'd been put in. So we suspect you are working with people who are in a similar situation, that either have sort of some form of technology but they don't know how to use it, or they up until now maybe haven't had the motivation to want to do anything digital. And we know there are lots of people who've said, oh, I can manage without it, who recently during the pandemic have actually been coming to us and saying, I feel really silly. I have purposely avoided it until now, and I'm beginning to wish I hadn't. And what can I do at this late stage? And if we have got people like that who are sort of saying to us, please, what do I do now? We're able to help them. So that was the one of the people that we helped.
But he wasn't the only person to contact the hotline, was he?
Well, you've mentioned older people, and that is traditionally the biggest group that we've helped. But I think what was interesting with the pandemic was seeing the range, and I think you've highlighted in what you've just said that it isn't just older people, and we've had people call the hotline who were, you've mentioned smartphones. They were actually using, the only computer device they had in the house was a smartphone, and they had 3 children at home that they were trying to homeschool. I just can't begin to imagine how difficult that is. And some of the schools were doing things that were paper-based, but most of the schools were sending things out online. And 3 children, 1 smartphone just doesn't work, does it? So that's always a challenge. In terms of people who don't, not just older people, I'm going to tell you in a minute about a project we've done with Universal Credit. But again, it's a real challenge when we have people phone up and say, I'm on Universal Credit, I want to try and update my journal, I need to do this, that and the other, but the only access I have is a smartphone, and we see that quite regularly. In addition to that, throughout lockdown, the people would obviously often access the library or the job centre and be able to use the computers there. And it's been far, far harder for them if those resources haven't been available to them. The thought of trying to do a universal credit application just on a smartphone is really tough. We will try and help people, but obviously some of it is the having the right kit available as well.
And you have another example about sort of young carers accessing a forum meeting.
Yes, that's one of the things we were doing within Dorset Council. Again, the hotline was promoted within the council itself, and we were contacted by someone who was setting up a young carers forum, and they had a lady who was a young carer who was trying to get in and use Zoom, and it was just setting her up, and you kind of think, oh, that she was a young carer by nature, she'll be absolutely fine with it. It turns out that anyone under 16 was blocked from using Zoom, and so we had to talk her through that and what we could do about that and how we could get her into the young carers meeting. So yep, we were more than happy to help. And it actually surprises me with the young people. We've talked to people who've trained people in the army, and the army are saying to us when they get 16 to 18-year-old recruits that a lot of the time they haven't got the skills they need for the jobs they're doing, and that always surprised me, because you think they come out of school with those skills and they're of a generation that would have them, but the research says that actually there's a real stigma for anyone of that age group who hasn't got the digital skills, and it's then really hard for them to ask for help in gaining them. So kind of an interesting and different look at digital exclusion there.
Yeah, there's a real assumption, isn't there, that sort of young people will have the skills,
Yes.
and that sort of there's not an issue there, when we're finding there very much is. And as we said earlier on, sort of the COVID has been sort of tough on people on lots of different ways, but something that's really been positive to come out of it has been the use of the internet, and certainly for us in work, it's allowed sort of work to continue, and through sort of home working, and sort of everyone sort of accessing sort of, we use Teams in Dorset Council, accessing sort of work through that and sort of virtual meetings. So, and it's suddenly become very much the norm, where when sort of we sort of went home, probably the middle of March, it was such a new thing for everyone and a real case of learning for people, wasn't it? But I suppose for me to finish was sort of another example from sort of Lyndsey's team was about a lady in her 70s who shared with the team that she doesn't know what would we have done if sort of COVID had happened in the 1970s, as we didn't have the internet. And it's sort of all very well for those who do have it, but it just makes those who don't have it even more excluded. And something we're sort of saying in the council is very much as sort of as the digital divide narrows, it's also getting very deeper for some people, and there's a real need to sort of support those people out of that sort of division, really. So I'm going to hand over back to Lyndsey, and she's going to talk about some of the work that they do and the help that's available.
Thank you. Just before I go on, I've noticed on the side chat bar someone asking about the laptops that were provided to school children. And yes, there were 290, but they were given to the children most in need. And obviously for the person who phoned us, who was trying to homeschool on a smartphone, I don't know why, whether the children weren't classed as in need or whether there just weren't enough to go around. But yes, you're right, they did get them to 290 children. I'm just going to talk to you about what we've been doing. I'm going to split it into pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID, I'm hoping you might have heard of, because we have this team of 70 digital champions that are trained and working across the whole of Dorset. Again, in the chat bar, someone was saying about, does this cover BCP? We are a pan-Dorset programme. We're working quite closely with BCP. We have digital champions in, or had when they were up and running, digital champions in Highcliffe and Christchurch. That was obviously historic, but we did also have some in some of the Bournemouth libraries, and one of the projects I'm going to talk to you about was very much is Bournemouth based anyway, so we're working quite closely with them. Those digital champions were in libraries, community centres, art centres, any community building traditionally that had computers. That's why they were set up in libraries. But actually, as time's gone on, more and more people are bringing devices to the digital champions and saying, I want help with this. We have a real peak in January with the people that have been given them for Christmas. What do I do with them? And usually from a son or daughter saying that's given the device, and this person who's been given it sort of saying, can you explain it? It's a bit like learning to drive. It's far easier if it isn't a member of your family showing you. And I think our digital champions would probably agree and are very happy to help on that front. So they were working face to face in these community centres. That obviously had to stop when COVID hit, and so we've working instead on a hotline, so I'll explain that to you. Just before I do that, some of the projects that we were working on, just so that you know, because as I've said, it's not just older people in libraries. We were working on a maternity matters project, so that is obviously people who are of childbearing age. What happened in March 19 was that all registrations for pregnancies were put online. The reason for that is the research showed that's what mums to be wanted, and a bit like Susan said, it's ideal, they can log on at any time of day, it's far more accessible for them and those sorts of things. That's fine for anyone who has access, but a real problem for anyone who doesn't. like we've said, anyone who's only got a smartphone. It's quite a big detailed form with medical history, next of kin, doctor's details and all sorts of things. So what we've set up is a mediated access service, so that if people can't do that themselves, they can phone us and we can help them through that process. As part of that, we put digital champions into doctors' surgeries, and that was another way of trying to get out and get to more people. And they weren't just dealing with sort of a pregnancy, they were helping anyone. And again, sort of in the pandemic, we've seen that doctors are going over more and more to e-consult, and we're very keen to ensure that our digital champions can help people do that and not be excluded by the fact that more doctors are going over to using e-consult. I talked briefly about universal credit, and we've set up a project where we were helping people with their universal credit forms. I've seen we've got a couple of citizens advice people online. What we were doing was working alongside them so that they could help with the substantive part and our digital champions could help with the digital part. We had training from citizens advice, but again, only to do the digital part and understand the form, so that was a great way to work together with them, but we also had a digital champion in a couple of the job centres to help people at the time and sort of with their forms, but again the digital part of it. We have a project over in in Bournemouth, and it is specifically Bournemouth based, working with unemployed and underemployed people. That had to be curtailed due to coronavirus, but we are looking at resetting that up, and that is going to be working remotely. It's changed substantially. It's actually now going to be loaning people devices for the 12 weeks of the programme, and they can sort of get learning that will be basic digital skills, but also employability digital skills. And that's where we're working very closely with BCP on that one. We've worked with housing associations in the past, and we're also working internally with the council to have digital champions within specific sectors, and I'm going to come back to that because that's a way we can work with groups as well. So I'll come back to how we can do that, because I think that's the solution bit at the end. Just want to tell you what we've done since the pandemic and how we reacted to that. So we realised that our digital champions couldn't sit in a library. The libraries were closing. A lot of our digital champions were of an age that they didn't want to be doing that, and some of them had health conditions, and some of our learners might have done. So we actually stopped before they were closed down, but we had no options anyway. So what we did was transfer it into a hotline, and that's where we are able to help our existing learners and tell them about it, but also we were looking at helping people with things like homeschooling, people who were suddenly working from home and maybe using different technology. And I think we all probably know how we've had a steep learning curve with that, but we were able to assist people, either employers who were suddenly saying to all their employees, off you go, work from home, but also individuals. We've been able to help people who would have been isolated to do things like join their Zoom Tai Chi class was one of the requests we had. So really good to be able to do that. And I looked up this morning, we've just had just over 290 calls since we set up the hotline at the end of March. It's almost not as busy as we would like it to be. We've got more capacity. So one of the messages from today is if anyone has people that are struggling, please ask them to call. It is mainly manned from 10 until 12 because we've got volunteers. Those are the set hours. We know that they're available. We'll try and answer the calls outside of that. So the phone number, if you all have a pen and pencil, is 01305 22 1000. And then option 2, any of you that were part of the COVID response may recognise that number because it is was also the COVID response number was option 1 and we are option 2. So please ask people to call if they need any help. We're very happy, ideally between 10 and 12, but we'll try and answer calls outside of that. What we're now looking at doing, and this is sort of going on to the future, is we have a pilot scheme, and it is very much only a pilot scheme, but we've been given 25 devices that the council have retired from use from staff, but they've still got a lot of life in them, and we are allowed to distribute those to people, and we're going to do that in a way that we also then provide the support. So we're giving them a digital champion as a mentor to get them up and running. We'll get them onto video calling, and then anything else they want to do. We hoped to do that in proper lockdown to be able to get people connected. We haven't obviously done that in time, but we're now saying to people, kind of get yourself ready for the winter. I know there's someone from Age UK on this webinar. I was talking to Age UK yesterday about the fact that actually if exercise classes have gone online, maybe people still want to do them when the winter comes and they don't want to be out in the dark evenings or it's icy. I think there are lots of positives that can have come out of the pandemic, and we want to sort of capitalise on those. So there are things like that that we want to look into. So we're giving out those 25 devices. It's a pilot. We're hoping that we might get some more, and if and when, then we would want to come and talk to groups and say to you, do you know people that are excluded, and how can we work with you about getting devices out to them? So that's an interesting sort of tidbit and a teaser to keep you interested. We haven't got them yet, but we're hoping that that's something that we can do in the future. The other thing, which is a sort of looking to the future, is at the moment we're going to keep the hotline going indefinitely because we don't know when we can get our digital champions back into libraries. But we want to look at ways we can work with groups, because we can and will continue to run our digital champions, and I think they're a great resource and they get a lot of use. But we know the hard to reach groups are defined as hard to reach for a reason. And we think the next best way for us to start approaching things is, rather than us trying to get to people individually, is to go out to groups and say, do you have people in your group who either act in that sort of digital champion role at the moment and might like some support from us, or have you got people that you would like us to train? They could be staff, they could be volunteers, because then we can look at a way of how we can help you to make your groups have that support, to make them more inclusive, but also to provide the support for people who might want to act in that role, to try and get out to those end users that at the moment aren't able to get that help. And again, I think as we look forward, at the moment, people seem to, some people, not everyone, motivation is a big barrier for us. There are a percentage of people who just haven't been interested in the internet. We think we've seen a little bit of a change with a pandemic, that none of us saw it coming, and there are some people that maybe now is the time for them to go digital, and if so, we want to help you to help them do that. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. That's all I was planning on saying, unless anyone can tell me I've missed anything major
Lyndsey,
from that. Yes.
Lyndsey, we've had a question in the chat bar.
Yes.
Can you just confirm whether the helpline is Pan Dorset or Dorset Council only area?
We will talk to anyone. We've done quite a lot of work on Radio Solent and had Hampshire queries, so I'm certainly not going to exclude BCP. Yes, we are quite happy to help people. Yeah,
thank you.
So can I ask a quick question on behalf of one of our listeners, viewers? I don't know what the right terminology is. What about for people that might have hearing impairments or that have visual impairments? What sort of support is there for those people who are marginalised or vulnerable through disability?
Yep, thank you. Because actually, the stats show that people who have a disability tend to be digitally excluded. Tend to be in a higher risk of being digitally excluded. We've worked with various groups that are groups that represent people with hearing and visual loss in terms of getting things out to them. But actually, a lot of the computer software and digital systems are very good at having accessibility tools, and it's more about explaining to people how to use them. So all of our digital champions have had training in how to use those accessibility tools. If we were talking about working with a group, we could train people within that group to use them. Certainly one of the groups that we're trying to get our 25 devices out to, we know there's a really high level of visual impairment in there, and so as part of our pilot we're going to be working with how they use the accessibility tools and whether that works for them and whether we need to put more help in or whether that's sufficient. One of the things that I know within the council we've found through working remotely is a couple of our colleagues who have visual and hearing impairments have both said actually they've found it easier to deal with because of working remotely. I think the tools are there, and again it's about a skills thing, about making sure people are able to use the tools that hopefully makes their lives easier. Does that answer your question, Anita?
It's not my question, but I think that answers the question. I mean, I guess there are a lot of our groups that support marginalised communities, so communities that don't have English as a first language, and it's all sort of those issues. But if you've got a team of people that can help develop the skills so that our groups can pass it on to their beneficiaries, then they need to get in touch with the champions.
And that's one of the reasons why we're very keen to work with groups. We are not pretending we know your end users. We're saying we can help you with the digital skills. You guys have got the expertise with the end users, and we need to kind of marry those skills up, I think.
Lovely. Thank you, Lyndsey.
Can I ask a question? It's Beryl Ezard from Wareham. I'm a Dorset councillor for Wareham, but I'm also a trustee of the youth club. So I deal with quite a lot of people during the obviously pandemic, and I'm one of the groups that have been helping with DCA with the Helping Kindness. I've had people ring me up and say, obviously they're not very digital, and I put a question in there or a statement saying that actually to register a death or during the COVID, you could actually ring up the contact line, and I think it was the same contact line as this one. But before that was set up, it was difficult to know who to ring, and so I had to contact somebody myself, being a councillor, and it's easier to contact officers at Dorset Council when you're a councillor, and actually got the telephone number direct, and she said it was very simple to do, actually, to register her husband's death when he died in April, unfortunately with terminal cancer. And the other thing that came up time and time again I don't want to go on computers because it's very expensive. It's very expensive to go online. Now, none of you have said yet, how cheap it is now. It's cheap to buy devices. It's quite cheap to go online as well. So if you've got a landline, which most of these people have that haven't got digital stuff, actually can access it a lot easier than people actually say. Yet there's a myth out there that it's terribly expensive. So perhaps we can do something to tell people, do a leaflet or something that would help in that way.
Lovely. Thank you, Beryl. Appreciate that.
Can I just say something in response to Beryl?
You can, Lyndsey. If I could just quickly say, if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat. We will answer them as we go, and we will, of course, any that we can't answer, we will put to Susan and Lyndsey. Sorry, Lyndsey, back to you.
No, I just want to say thank you, Beryl. I get my digital hat on and I slightly forget, and I really shouldn't, that actually part of it is making sure there are other ways, and like you said, still being able to phone. I spoke to someone who had received a shielding letter who said it was peppered with websites. She was one who said it's made me realise I need to get online, but there do have to still be alternatives for people who aren't online. But also, Beryl, thank you so much for saying about, yes, actually online is cheaper than people realise. BT do a basics broadband package that they really don't advertise, but I would like all of you to know about and tell people, because the way that package works, if anyone is on means tested benefits, and they do have to prove to BT that they're on a particular benefit, but it's a means tested one, they can get telephone with some telephone calls included, and currently, because of the pandemic, and I think it's going to stay, unlimited broadband for £10 and 7p a month. Now, for some people, that's going to be out of their reach, I know, but for most, you know, in comparison to most people thinking that's £20 or £30 a month, it isn't. It's £10, and I mustn't forget the 7p. So thank you, Beryl.
Lovely. Thank you, Lyndsey. So we'll be carrying on with the chat, so please do put any questions that you've got in there. Oh, hello, Jackie.
Yeah, can I make a comment that we actually have free broadband in our village halls in this area, and that is another resource that people could use. I am sure there are many, many more village halls that have free Wi-Fi, and we've been having the post office as well. And once, as I say, I was just taking laptops down there so people could use and do FaceTime with their children, grandchildren.
That's lovely. I'm going to mention some of that in a moment, Jackie. Thank you. That's really helpful. So, Susan, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I think we've just got a final poll quickly, if we've got time.
Yeah, that's fine.
Which was, would people in their groups or organisations be interested in training as a digital champion? And the poll is coming up. So yes, no, or don't know. And if sort of people tick sort of yes, not that we're trying to sway the votes, that if we could just collect those details and we can get in touch with people. As Lyndsey said, we're quite eager to sort of get the word spread and use sort of different community organisations. So. Okay.
Are you happy if I close that poll?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
Just share the results.
Oh, fabulous. There's always that little worry.
Well, lovely. So if you did say yes, if you could make sure in the chat that you just put yes and your name, we can link that back to the Eventbrite invitation so that we can, with your permission, pass on the contact details so that you can be contacted. So just yes
people
and your
just
name.
in the chat as well, in terms of the don't knows, just perhaps explain sort of what's maybe sort of the don't know is about. It'd just be useful to know, to see if there's sort of work we can do around that as well. So thank you, and thank you for your time this morning. So,
well, thank you very much, Susan, and thank you, Lyndsey, as well. I just wanted to do just a quick overview, really highlighting a couple of the points that have already been mentioned. So if you just bear with me while I quickly share my screen. So we've just had the Charity Digital Skills Report come out, and they were sort of in the process of putting their survey together when COVID hit. So they were able to collect some data around COVID as well, which I think is really useful, and it's definitely worth a little Google to have a look at. As a sector, we still have some issues around our own abilities, our own skills, our own confidence when it comes to technology. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. because we're a reflection of the community in which we serve. So it's not surprising that that is the case. But as leaders, which is what we are, then we also need to be leading the way for a lot of people in our community to take away particularly some of the worry that people have. So something that came up in the survey was that actually 21% of the people that took part in the survey had cancelled services, and that was directly linked to the lack of digital skills that they had amongst their staff team. So it was a big factor in why some services were mothballed. And that would also be, I think, reflected in the business sector as well as in our sector. And a very significant 34% of the audience are not online. So when we start to talk about those digitally excluded groups that Susan mentioned earlier, so people who live rurally, low education attainment, older, low income, disability, homeless, what we start to see really is our everyday customers. These are the people that make use of voluntary sector services. So it's not surprising that a large number of people who use our services aren't online. And that's why we become, as Lyndsey said, an incredible partner in this process, because actually some of the people that are most excluded are the people that we see every day. So that makes us a really important part in this process. Just looking generally at the skills within the sector, we can see that we do have a particular issue. And this is national, I should highlight, this isn't just looking at Dorset, but it's very, very important that part of your planning, and there's no reason why it can't be built into your recovery planning, is improvement of digital. And that really takes effort. It's not something that's going to happen by accident. It's something where you actually have to have a process in place. How are you going to support your team to develop their skills? How are you going to get funding in order to be able to prove the technological equipment that you have access to? And how are you going to break down some of the barriers that people might have towards accessing digital? So when we look at digital inclusion from the point of view of our sector, I've broken it down into 3 key pieces of a jigsaw. So the first one is to do with digital access to technology and to be able to go online. Now, as Beryl pointed out, it actually can be cheaper to go online than a lot of people worry about. But actually for some people, they don't have landlines in their home, so they don't have access to home broadband. And they may be making use of data on a telephone for which they're paying for by the minute. Maybe that they have some free access as part of their contract, but they are more likely to be pay as you go. So they may not have any digital access even through their phone if they have one. So access to technology and to Wi-Fi is a real issue. And as Jackie mentioned, that's somewhere that we can help. Can we open up our charity to give access? Are all of our computers used all of the time? Is there a way that we can have a front door to our charity that allows people to come in to be able to make use of the technology if they have the skills? Can we open up our Wi-Fi? Can we have digital day at the village hall where the Wi-Fi is on, people can come in, they can use their own tech if they have it. And of course, if that takes off, you've got a great opportunity for digital champions to be able to join to help those who might struggle. Can we create access? So actually, can we join up with other charities who may have the technology, that may have the computers, such as libraries, and actually support our users to be able to make use of that? And then we have the skills and the confidence. Well, what if we all made a commitment today to become digital champions? What if we were all frontline champions, either linking up to the digital champions that already exist? So we carry around with us in our purse that telephone number that was given out by Lyndsey. We have it with us 24/7 to give to whoever we may speak to who is struggling with technology. And what if we look at our charity skills and we look at whether we can improve our own ability? So what if we made a pledge to improve our skills so that we can improve theirs? And we can do that through recruitment. Look at our volunteer base. Do a little bit of a skills audit. How many people are comfortable, confident users of IT? Do we know what IT basic skills are? Do we know what it is that people actually need to be able to do on a computer, such as forms, shopping, and are we confident using those? I think we probably find our skills are higher than we think they might be. And I think we overestimate the skills that others have got. Can we recruit younger people? If we want to target being able to support younger people in the community, then it's really nice if their mentors are of a similar age. And equally, can we recruit older people who are coping really well with digital technology? My mother's 84, she shops online, she can now order her prescriptions online. Trust me, she's needed a lot of help to get there, but she is, and she's doing it brilliantly. But she could be a great mentor to other people of a similar age who'd never grown up with any technology and are now learning to use a simplified smartphone or a tablet. Have you got a digital strategy? Have you thought about the funding, the skills, and what actions you're going to take? And have you made a plan for it? And more importantly, are you taking action? So are you improving access, improving your skills, and very importantly, thinking about the alternatives? Now, as Susan pointed out earlier, we know that the digital gap is getting narrower. As more and more people come through generationally being used to computers, we see a narrowing of that gap, but it gets deeper. So people end up without the skills, without the confidence, and without the technology. So they end up with more things that get in the way, an inability to have a regular enough income to be able to pay a monthly bill so that they've always got access to online. Children in their family, where they've got one shared tool that they can use in the household, and how exactly do you share that out, even if you've been lucky enough to be given a laptop for your household? So what we see is this getting deeper and deeper for the people that are already marginalised, who already find it very difficult to be included within society. So although it is really, really important that we reach out to those people, that we make it as easy as possible for them to get the skills, the confidence and the access, we also need to make sure we're still providing alternatives. If we move too quickly, we leave lots of people behind. So when you're putting together resources, when in this post-COVID world, we start to become more and more digital, it's really important that we still have access for people who don't want to get involved in digital, currently aren't motivated to, or there are so many barriers in their way that actually they've got priorities that they feel are bigger than accessing digital. So the help telephone lines, they're really important and they're really engaging for people. It also can mean that you've got that entry-level conversation as well to talk about how they could access digital more easily. So helplines are fantastic, as is the opportunity to be able to, post or share out to people resources. So we mustn't underestimate the need to still have those. If we always default to them, we'll never lift people out of that deep isolation. So we need to make sure that it's a pronged approach that fits together. That sounds awful. That sounds like pronging people. I don't want you to prong people. But if we've got an approach that fits together, that actually then we've got multiple channels into that inclusion. And I think as a sector, we're more than capable of doing that. And I think the first step is perhaps strategy. We'll later on be doing another survey, a follow-up to the survey that we did on the state of the sector. And importantly within that, we will be asking questions around what skills you think your organisation needs. Because if we can all join up together, if digital champions might have one gateway through the council, but actually the council then has threads that runs right through our sector to the most vulnerable people that are there, then actually what we're creating is a supportive base for those most marginalised people. So thank you for your attention on that today. We're really lucky, and I don't want us to lose the opportunity to hear from her. We're really lucky to have Ellie Maguire with us. And she's going to talk through the next round of funding that is available by Dorset Community Foundation. So morning, Ellie. I have to say I can't see you on my screen at the moment.
I'm here.
Lovely. Hello, Ellie. So if I hand over to you to be able to talk us through the change to your funding with this next round.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. All the information is obviously on the website, so hopefully it's clear, but groups can call me if they've got a question. I've just asked them to read through the criteria first, make sure that their query isn't answered there. So, so yes, we've moved to phase 2 of the funding programme now. It is the last and final phase. As most of you know, under phase 1, we looked at the very immediate and emergency needs that have been caused by coronavirus, and we've been able to fund activities only until the end of September. Under phase 1, we can now fund activities through to the end of the financial year, so the end of March, but we can't go beyond that. It's still very much an emergency fund. For those who don't know, the majority of the money we are distributing has come from the National Emergencies Trust, or NET. So we're kind of bound by our contractual obligations to NET as to how we deliver the funding. So it is an emergency fund still, so we're calling it a longer term emergency phase. So much of the priorities are actually the same. So we're still looking at vulnerable people who've been impacted by the crisis, whether that's economically or social impact, and trying to address their needs through the fund. So much of that is the same. What we have had to do is make some restrictions as to who can apply and the process, to enable us to make the best possible decisions, really. And because we don't have quite as much money in phase 2 as we had in phase 1, so we've had to make some difficult decisions. So the size of the group that can apply has been restricted. So we're looking at groups with annual expenditure of less than £500,000. Hopefully most of you on this call will be within that. So we're really going back to our bread and butter priorities, which is always the smaller groups in Dorset. We've decided that we won't be able to support parish councils either under phase 2, which we did under phase 1. Again, it's just a reflection of knowing that the demand will be high and trying to make sure that we can fund as many applicants as possible. So that's another change there. The other big change to make groups aware of, under phase 1, it was very much a rolling basis, the decision making, and I think most groups received a decision within 2 weeks and sometimes much quicker than that, and the grants have been coming out thick and fast. Under phase 2, in order to make the best decisions we can, we really need to look at the majority of the applications at one time. So we are going back to a more traditional deadline panel meeting. So the deadline for applications is the 28th of August, and that's for grants of up to £5,000. However, in the acknowledgement that there may still be emerging immediate emergency needs coming from the community as things change, or where groups have a more immediate need for funding to support them, we are allowing fast track applications of up to £2,000, which will still be looked at on a rolling basis, so you'll get a decision more quickly. I don't know if the uptake will be particularly high. We've set aside an amount of money for those, and it will just be on a first come first served basis for those fast track applications. Other important things, we can now accept applications for groups simply looking for a replacement of a loss of income, which is something we couldn't do under phase 1, but there are some restrictions around that. So groups that are looking for us to replace a loss of income, goes without saying that loss of income needs to have been a direct result of the pandemic, and also we would expect that group is currently delivering services again, and that those services are addressing community needs, you know, under the priorities of the fund. So if it's a charity that's back to business as usual and isn't really addressing coronavirus, sadly we wouldn't be able to help them. I think really the important thing to say, because, as I say, we are restricted ourselves by the priorities that we're given by NET. The funding programme remains focused on the beneficiaries and on the needs of beneficiaries. So we're not so much looking at what do organisations need, we're still looking at what are the most acute needs in the community that have been caused by coronavirus, and we'll be looking to prioritise applications that are addressing those community needs. So just bear that in mind when you make your applications. just thinking if there's anything else I need to tell you. Core costs are fine, which is usually the case with the Community Foundation. You know, if your whole organisation is all about coronavirus at the moment and addressing those community needs, you could apply for 100% of core costs if you wanted to. If you have a range of services and one particular service is your application, you could apply for a proportion of your core costs to support that service if you wanted to. But again, if you're not clear on that, groups can ask me by phone or email. I think they're all the most important changes that we've made. Hopefully it's all clear on the webpage, so do have a look at that. We are still supporting new and emerging groups if they're still around and still running. Banks are still not able to set up new bank accounts, is my understanding, for new groups. So we're continuing to pay referee organisations if you're a new group, so that we can still support you. I think I'll just take any questions from there. It's probably the most sensible thing.
Lovely, Ellie, thank you. We don't have any questions in the chat, so I think you've been extremely clear. I hope you didn't feel too rushed for you as you ran over slightly. Thank you very much. And just before I wrap up, I just wanted to hand over to Joe, because I know that you've got an update for us, Joe. You're on mute, Joe.
Sorry about that. Right, now I need to go back to the screen where the information was. Okay. I don't know how many of you know about community fridges in Dorset, but there have been a group of people looking to see how many different setups there are in Dorset when it comes to food banks and community fridges. And community fridges redistribute nutritious food to the community. They help connect people to their communities, save money and reduce waste. Dorset Council would like to invite anybody to a stakeholder meeting to look at setting up community fridges in Dorset. This is going to be Thursday the 30th of July, so that's next Thursday, next week, at 3 till 4 on MS Teams. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment, but just to give you a very quick outline, in Dorset, as in much of the country, food poverty is hidden. Food banks provide emergency support, but many people are too embarrassed to access these. Food insecurity isn't just about hunger, it's also being unable to afford or access a sufficient supply of adequate food to promote health. So they could be eating food, but it's not actually healthy food, so actually isn't giving the sort of the nutrients that are needed. And the idea of setting up community fridges in Dorset is so that good food could be redistributed to the local community, and it helps people connect with one another. It supports people in food poverty to access nutritious food in a non-stigmatizing way, saves money, but it's also going to help potentially improve health and well-being. So it's quite a complex and multi-dimensional issue. It's the chance also to enhance the amazing communities that we live in and have been highlighted through this COVID-19 experience. It also affects climate change because everything is going to be very local to the area by using these fridges, not having the waste and not travelling so far to put the food in there and to take it out again. Now, the person that we'll need to contact is Fiona.Thomas. Thomas is THOMAS at dorsetcouncil.gov.uk.
Joe, sorry, just that must be very hard for people to jot down. The information will be available on our website in the news column and also in our e-bulletin, which will go out tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'll let you just finish the end of that email address, but I just thought I could see people suddenly looking for pens halfway through. We will make sure that the invite is shared on both the news site and also on our e-bulletin.
excellent. So this is Fiona Thomas is a community development worker who works for Dorset Community at Dorset Council, she's also been working with Public Health and CCG to get this going. So there's been a lot of work behind the scenes, and the more involvement that we can have from the community, the better. So please feel that you should join, and gosh, my words have gone completely out the window because I can't see anybody. Come along next Thursday, because I think it's something that all of us in the community can help with. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Jo. We will make sure that that information is available. Susan Ward-Rice has shared Fiona Thomas's email address in the chat, and the chat is always made available on our webinar page on our website. And we try and get that done today, but it is done always by the end of the week with the recording as well. So if you wanted to go back over the session or share it with anybody. I'd like to extend that thank you again to Susan Ward-Rice and to Lyndsey Trinder from Dorset Council, and also to Ellie Maguire from Dorset Community Foundation. We hope that we've given you lots of food for thought, not to steal Jo's fridges I did out at the end, but I do hope that it was something that you will include in your strategy moving forward. I've seen all of the lovely yeses in the chat of people that would like to get involved right now, and that's the best way to take action. Just because you make contact and just because you just find out more information about digital champions does not mean there's an increase to your workload. You can pace this so it's in line with your own planning. So if it is that you don't start rolling this out or advertising it externally until January of next year, that doesn't matter. The fact that it's in your plans and you're taking action, that's what's important. Thank you so much for today. Thank you for your continued support of our webinars. I can't believe we're moving towards our 20th, but we really hope we'll see you next week for our 18th webinar, where we'll be revisiting the theme of village halls, talking about the updates that have come out from ACRE since we last saw you, and also an opportunity really to update you on the support that is available for your village hall. Okay, lovely to see you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much. Thank you.